Hello, I'm Dawn Durham, and welcome to PaTTANpod. Today we are discussing the implementation of active participation. Joining us today is Dr. Anita Archer. Dr. Archer, thank you for sitting down and talking with us to share. Thank you. We're so excited that you were able to share your knowledge and insights about best practices for instruction. And I know you're here for the Literacy Symposium this week, so we're grateful that you were able to carve some time out to sit with us for this podcast. So much of your work concentrates on explicit instruction that is systematic, direct, and engaging to students. And that engagement to students is what we want to focus on today. We know we talk so much about active participation. We know what it is and some of the benefits of using active participation in the classroom, but what I think some teachers struggle with is moving from what it is to being able to implement and knowing how to do it. Would you agree with that?
Well, certainly we often have knowledge that we don't use in many different aspects of our lives, and active participation is one of them, where we might know, oh, I could have choral responses, I could have partner responses, I could have written responses, but then getting it into consistent daily practice is sometimes a challenge.
And when we think about implementing active participation, there's two ways in which we can think about it. We can think about it implementing through an individual teacher's perspective in one classroom, but we could also implement it as a school-wide approach, could we not?
Absolutely. In fact, in most of the schools where I work, active participation is a non-negotiable. It is every class, every period, throughout the whole period, bell to bell, because good instruction requires active participation. If I really, really want the students to learn, which is the outcome we always want, then I have to have children say things and write things and do things the whole segment that I have with them. And not just in this period, but in the same period tomorrow and for the entire school year. It is a part of good instruction. You know, when you think about making a difference in terms of student learning, it requires that the kids participate. I say something, you say something, I write something, you write something, I do something, you do something. It never can be. I say something as a teacher, I say something, I say something, I say something, I say something, see you tomorrow. See, most of the kids that we teach, whether they're elementary or secondary, have already faded out if we do that. So it definitely can be done as a whole school, but it has to be done systematically.
So let's talk about that. So if we want a school climate that engages our learners and they're actively participating in the learning process, how do we go about doing that in a way that's going to sustain so that it happens today, tomorrow, the next day, and across all classrooms?
So it takes a plan. And a plan that starts with, why are we going to do this? And why we do it is learning. The students are more engaged, thus they learn. The students are rehearsing information, thus they learn. The students are retrieving information, thus they learn. So there's many reasons why. And then we don't have to cover all of the possible active participation strategies. We need like a small number that we are going to systematically introduce over time at the school site that then teachers could utilize. For example, we might start with, okay, we have responses that are verbal, responses that are written, and responses where you do something. And we pick out just ones that are easy to implement, that would fit into many teachers' current ways of teaching, that would be totally generalizable. So, for example, I was working with an elementary school where we chose one, choral responses. We're going to say it together. And anytime there is a short response, instead of calling on one student, we're going to say the response together. We chose to have children also share answers with a partner. And so we use structured partners where the teacher picked partners, gave them a number, 1 and 2, and then instead of calling on one student to respond, we could say 1's tell your partner, 2's tell your partner. We chose to have written responses where the students would have whiteboards and they would write down information. So whether it was math, write down the problem and solve it, now show me, write the spelling word down and show me. And we also had some doing responses, like they would show answers with hand signals, like if we had multiple choice 1, 2, 3, what is the answer? We had response cards that they held up, but a very limited number that would give people plenty to utilize. And we started by introducing them like one by one, and then the teachers would go out and utilize them, then come back and discuss them, either as a whole group at the elementary school or a small group, meaning their grade level equivalents, with the special ed teachers being involved in all of the different ones. So we have third grade teachers and a special ed teacher, because it's equally important, obviously, in general ed and special ed. And then we went from there. For example, once we had it introduced, we went out and tried it, came back and discussed it. Then some teachers said, oh, I'm going to make little videos, little 5-minute videos, and I'm going to invite you, my partner, to look at it, or my team members to look at it. Very much the same as we did in high schools and middle schools, except we organized it by departments. Same thing though, we introduced a small number of active participation strategies, introduced it at a staff meeting, went out and tried it, discussed it with the social studies teachers, the science teachers, the health teachers, the math teachers, and then we came back, used it, discussed it, came back and discussed its use. So a plan of implementation. But it has to go further than that. It has to be something that, if we're doing it school-wide, it's non-negotiable. So every walkthrough by a principal focuses on active participation. Every walkthrough by a coach or a assistant principal focused on active participation. But it makes so much difference. There's some other nuggets that we found really worked well in terms of implementation, was actually taking the curriculum you already have and writing in, I'm going to have a core response here. I'm going to have a partner response here. I'm going to have a discussion where the students get to plan what they're going to do in the discussion. So actually annotating the curriculum to have active participation.
So within this plan I hear you talking about, we're selecting a small number, because there's a vast number of active participation strategies we could use, but we need to choose ones that are useful, efficient, and effective. And what I heard you say was introduce them and practice them, do that rehearsal practice, so the students have this sense of automaticity with them. Not only the students, but the teachers turn have this automaticity of getting used to always saying, my turn, your turn, or using response cards, or turn to partners 1 and 2 talk to each other. So it's kind of a training, if you will, of both the teachers and the students for this rehearsal practice. And another thing I heard you say, go ahead.
But one big thing is also simultaneously moving away from practices that are not efficient. For example, calling on volunteers, which then we want this to be equitable. We want everybody to say it, everybody to write it, everybody to do it. So while we are looking at good practices, core responses, partner responses, discussion, team responses, use of whiteboards, use of response cards, use of hand signals, all of those research-validated practices. At the same time, we want to diminish calling on volunteers, which will end up calling on the highest performing, most assertive, most proficient students, whether it's elementary or secondary, special ed or general ed. So we want to reduce that. Calling on inattentive students is not a fruitful way to involve students. So it is both increasing good practice while we replace poor practices.
And you had talked about the role that principals, assistant principals, the instructional leaders in the building play.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think that's something that sometimes gets pushed to the side as, oh, well, it's something the teachers need to take care of, or we'll deal with it, we know how to take care of it. But those instructional leaders really play a vital role in walking through the classroom and supporting the teachers in this role and supporting the school climate.
Absolutely. In fact, the principal and assistant principal and the coaches as leaders is essential. They have to expect it, they have to train on it, they have to look at walkthroughs, they have to get their staff to video the use of active participation that they use at staff meetings or at departmental meetings or at grade level meetings. All of those things show that leadership. But then they also need to, in their staff meetings, assign partners and talk to your partner about this, report back, use choral responses so that the teachers are constantly revisiting all of these great practices. And so it is so related to leadership because we can fall back quite quickly into no active participation, thus no rehearsal, thus no retrieval, thus reduced learning. So we need to maintain it as a practice until it becomes so habitual we wouldn't even think about teaching without active participation.
So that piece of practicing what you preach applies to the instructional leaders in the
Absolutely.
building, not just to us teachers.
Absolutely. They get to do it too. And so they have to sit in the front row at all staff development so that they're showing this is important, I'm present, I'm expecting this, I'm supporting this, I know it will make a difference. Even at assemblies, incorporating it as the principal leads the assembly so that right there the teachers say, oh yeah, even there it makes a difference.
And when we think about how we want this to happen pervasively across the building, to create this active participation climate in the school, we talked about how it's happening in every classroom, it's happening in every day, because as you said, it's kind of easy to fall back to not having active participation. So when we think about, we're about to start a new school year, and we think about what we need to prioritize this school year. Well, we worked on active participation last year, pick a new priority, when in fact, that needs to be a priority year after year after year.
Absolutely. It's like a good diet. You don't just do it one year and then go back to junk food because then, your health goes downhill. It's this exact same thing here. It's so essential to learning, so essential in our classrooms that it is the forever priority. You should never have like a list of school improvement priorities that doesn't have active participation as number one because it affects everything else. First of all, most importantly, it affects learning. But it also affects things like student-teacher relationship, which has such a high effect size on achievement. But how am I going to have, if I never get any active participation, how do I have a relationship with you? How do I have, if I am not having you write things down and I'm moving around the room and monitoring, that's when I have that relationship with you. And so it affects learning, relationship, retention of information, learning. So yes.
One of the things, and you've shared this with me before regarding staff development and the research on staff development, and some of it that you've talked to me about, where it's hard to change the beliefs of teachers. What we need to focus on is changing the behavior of teachers, which in turn will have effects on the student learning, which in turn will then change change teacher beliefs.
Right.
So this is kind of that process of we can't take a teacher or a group of teachers and say, okay, we're changing your beliefs today, tomorrow everything will be perfect and handy-dandy.
Yeah.
But it's a process of teaching and changing their behaviors. Through that, we see the students having better student-teacher relationships. They're more actively engaged. Their learning outcomes are more positive, and when we're seeing the effect of that and the realization of that, and that then changes the teacher's beliefs, and we get more buy-in to make it a priority year after year after year.
I think we have much evidence that this is true in many different aspects, is we change behavior, and then from it we change our belief systems. And we have evidence of that in terms of race relationships, in terms of neighborhood relationships. So this is exactly what we need to do at the school. This is so important. It's not a personal decision. It is a professional decision. It is sort of like a physician who picks the right medication. That's a professional decision. It would be unconscionable for them to say, oh, but I really would prefer red pills versus the one that has research. Well, that's not what a professional does. A professional says, what is going to make the most difference in the outcome we desire? And the outcome we desire is learning. No matter what the subject area is, we want learning in our classrooms, and this is one of the non-negotiables that leads to learning.
I like how you keep saying non-negotiable, because I think that's really where we need to focus when we think about a school-wide approach to implementing active participation. It's not an option. This is something we are all going to be actively learning, actively engaged in, actively participating in for ourselves, so that our students are learning more and they're more with us. And we know that being academically engaged is a high predictor of academic success. So we want that for all of our students, no matter the grade level, no matter what classroom they go to, no matter what teacher they have. That's a piece we want for everyone. And I think when we think about that whole school approach, let's talk through about an individual teacher. If I, as an individual teacher in 7th grade and 11th grade, as a 2nd grade teacher, want to think about implementing some of these active participation strategies that I know are useful, that I've tried before. Maybe I've tried choral responses a couple times, but I fell back into that, didn't really continue with that. Or I tried partners talking to each other before sharing out in a larger group. How do I, as an individual teacher, go about doing that in my own classroom to sustain and create that climate within my own 4 walls?
So we have to remember that teachers are human, and that our learning process is the same as our students, is that our students, when we teach something, they get a minimal level of competency, and then they keep practicing it and they become more proficient, and then they keep practicing it and they become more automatic at it. Okay? So I, as a teacher, adding something new to my repertoire goes through the same thing, is that I first get a level of proficiency, and then I get a minimal level, then I get better at it, and then I become automatic, so that I don't even have to put a lot of cognitive energy into it. I say, oh, short response, everybody say it together. Long response, think about the answer. Once tell your partner to smear back what they said. So we get automatic at it. But at first, we have to do it with great intentionality. And so the teacher has to do the same thing. They have to have a limited number of practices that they are going to try to get automatic at. They can later add to it other practices. But so they say, okay, short responses, I'm going to do choral responses. I've been calling on individual children. So what I'm going to do is when I start to say Jose, instead I'm going to say, think everyone, say it together. And so they could use their current practice to cue what would be better practice. So a limited number of things you're going to work on, recognizing it's going to be very intentional, just like changing any habit, but it's useful to look at the research on habit. Replace what you're doing with a new practice, but use the old habit to cue it. Instead of, oh, candy bar, ooh, cue, carrots. Okay, okay. Well, that's maybe a bad analogy, but it works. So that's the same thing here. Then I really recommend actually taking your curriculum. Maybe you have a core reading curriculum, or maybe a math curriculum, or social studies, and annotating it right in the teacher's manual. Choral response, partner response. I could use whiteboards here. It would be a good place for a discussion, but I better have them plan that discussion and write down their talking points before the discussion so more kids are included. So putting it right in your teacher's manual. We even do this when we do whole group or whole school. Like all the 3rd grade teachers will sit down with their teacher's manual and talk about how they could infuse active participation within it.
And so when we think about that, annotating the curriculum, because we talked about that, whether we're doing a whole school approach, you could do that as a grade level team, a department team, or an individual teacher. That really makes that plan very intentional. You're very aware and cognizant of, I know I need to do this, I know this is beneficial. There's lots of research out there that tell me why it's beneficial, but this will certainly help me to implement it more consistently than if I just think of it on the fly, because we know there's just so much going on during any minute of the day in a classroom. We just can't necessarily think of that on the fly until it becomes so automatic. It's almost harder to not do it than it is to do it. That's the automaticity piece that we want to build in, both for the teachers and for the students.
Well, and also it's a change in mindset in terms of my goal as a teacher is to enhance the learning of my students, not to whip through the curriculum, but to have an outcome of learning. Unless they are rehearsing it, unless they are retrieving it, unless they're responding and making, remembering that active participation also makes learning visible. I mean, if you're just sitting there passively, how do I know what you're thinking or doing? But if I have you write it, if I have you show me an answer with hand signals, if I have you hold up a response card, if I have you share with your partner your talking points, I'm making it visible so that as a teacher, I can ensure that the kids are learning. We sometimes have totally missed the boat on terms of our outcome. You know, it's sort of like a corporate president. Their outcome is profits, teachers is learning. But only with active participation can I guarantee the rehearsal, retrieval that leads to it, but also it makes it visible so I can adjust my lesson. And so how, without that, I don't know, can I go forward? Do I have to get more practice? Do I need to go back? I mean, with all groups of students, but particularly with struggling students, we have to be certain that we are getting enough embedded formative assessment to be able to change what we are doing.
And that formative assessment is certainly a way that we can use the active participation as a way to formally assess. So as you had said, we can make those adjustments as necessary, particularly for all students, but particularly for our most struggling students. Because that's where we need to start thinking about what did they miss, what do I need to go over with them again, and how do I need to approach it in a different manner.
Right.
And when something you say often, and I try to remind myself of this, and I try to remind the teachers I work with, is this phrase of low prep, high impact. That you want to focus on strategies and engagement activities that are low in preparation but have a high student learning impact. And I perceive active participation as just that. Yes, it takes a little bit of time to train myself and train my students, so there's a little bit of prep work. But overall, and kind of generally speaking, I would say it's low prep but has a very high impact.
In fact, of all things that I could add to my repertoire, active participation would be the teacher behavior that would have the most impact on learning. And so, I mean, this is our professional responsibility to improve learning. And so the fact that I am not calling on individuals, but we're saying it together, or I have structured partners where I give partner one a question and a sentence starter, and they say an answer, and I give partner two also a responsibility that they have to agree or disagree or mirror back it. These are all things that I'm not spending hours making games. I am just infusing this right within the content that I'm teaching. So yes, it is definitely high outcome, low prep. And that is always my goal in training teachers, so that they have things that they could utilize. You know, if I was watching videos is another excellent way to do it, and I know that PaTTAN has videos of teachers teaching. Our website, www.explicitinstruction.org, has many little videos of teachers teaching that could be analyzed just in terms of active participation.
And I know I certainly encourage anyone who's out there listening to visit the Explicit Instruction website. We use it at PaTTAN as consultants. We use those videos continuously in our trainings to show active participation, to show the vocabulary routines, to show the phonics routines or writing routines you have up there. So we do appreciate that, and we do encourage folks to get out on that website.
Right, and so that is also a way to get sort of the big idea of the rhythm of instruction from teacher to students and back.
And see the flow.
It's so much more fun. It's so the time goes by faster. It's much more interesting to students. Learning is not passive. You know, my motto has always been that learning is not a spectator sport. We have a lot of children who just think that just being there is all they have to do, but that will not lead to learning. They have to say things and write things and do things.
I always think the kids should go home more tired than I, as the teacher, should go home. That they should also be going home and feeling exhausted. Because they should be, you know, we want them to be working and having a brain sweat throughout the day. And in order to do that, I don't want them sitting there at their table or at their desk. I want them to be part of it with me.
I want them to go home, and when someone says, what did you learn in school today? That they say, in math I learned this, and in science I learned this, in social studies I learned this, in reading we did this. But that requires that they had to be present, engaged, and rehearsing.
And so when we, just to kind of think through this, when we're talking about implementing active participation, we want to be useful, effective, efficient. We want to introduce the strategies. We want to practice the strategies. We want to then go back and debrief. How did it go? Both with the teachers and the students to understand and make adjustments as necessary and as needed. And that's really for a whole school approach, as well as for an individual teacher to go ahead and implement in the classroom.
Right.
Always keeping in mind that the goal is learning and not losing sight of that goal. Because sometimes I fear we might lose sight of the goal being learning.
Well, that's the only goal. And so it is, and every teacher does not have to utilize the same active participation. It's mostly the interactive aspect of it that leads to learning. and the practice and rehearsal. Yes.
I'm glad you said that, because that's not something I would have thought of, that we don't all have to have the exact same strategies,
Right.
but we all need to be using strategies. And then again, those instructional leaders play a very large role in helping us as a school and as teachers to maintain that active participation, come to expect it, look for it, encourage it, assist when there's a lull in the active participation, because as you said, it can be easy to fall back to not doing that. So they really play a key piece there.
Once you mastered it and get to automaticity, there's no way you can fall back to it, because you just reflect on your own time of being in a situation where the teacher just talked the whole time and you never said anything or wrote anything or did anything. You won't allow that to happen again.
Again,
Yes.
we want that automaticity so much so that it feels unnatural to not have active
That's right.
participation in the classroom. We want it to be that it's just a part of your everyday life and everyday working
Right.
with the students. And with the staff members as well, for those instructional leaders, to make that a part of their routine. And even as PaTTAN consultants, for us to make that a part of our routine for the teachers and administrators
sure
that
you
we
do.
train, so that it becomes, we model what we teach, and so that
That's
they can
right.
do that when they turn back around into their own schools and their own classrooms.
Right.
One of the things that we try so hard here at PaTTAN is to inspire educational growth. So if you had to think about and say something to the professionals out there, to the practitioners in the world who are listening, what's something to inspire their professional growth?
You came into teaching because you wanted to make a difference. And so your whole career, this is my 51st year of teaching, your whole career, you're saying to yourself, what can I do to add to my repertoire that would increase the outcome for my students? And that is what motivates us, keeping our eye on the benefit to children in terms of learning, but also in terms of teacher-student relationship. That as professionals, that is totally our intention. We went to this career with that desire, and we will every day need to really ask ourselves, am I optimizing and supporting the learning of my students and the interpersonal relationship also? They're done at the same time. I was just a few weeks ago at a conference where I did the end note, but I went to the keynote also and listened to it. And I said, oh my goodness, there's something I need to add to my repertoire. Now, I have spent 51 years only thinking about instruction. And yet, right up to the end of my career, which is far from now, is looking at this behavior and adding it to my repertoire so that I can optimize what the outcome is for my students. And that's what I see in the teachers. I've been in this state many times, that hunger for, I want to make a difference, and I want to connect with my students, and what can I do that will do both of those? And active participation is number one.
That's wonderful, and we so appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your
enjoyed it.
insight. It's been such a joy to have you here with us and for you to walk us through how we do something that we know is beneficial, but how do we make it happen in our classrooms, in our school, in a pervasive and consistent manner. So I
Thanks,
truly
Dawn.
appreciate that.
Thanks for allowing me to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you to all of you in the field. You truly inspire educational growth within your students. Thank you to John Ragsdale for producing this podcast, and we'll see you next time on PaTTANpod.